Almost since its inception, cricket has been synonymous with fair play. It's not cricket, just another way of saying it's not right, was an expression used throughout the English-speaking world, not just in cricket-playing countries. It was a gentleman's game more than any other sport, and people who played and the people who followed cricket knew they were special. Along the way, my generation decided that the game would be more exciting and more testing if we turned up the heat on the funny quips and used them to intimidate the opposition. History suggests most people of mine and subsequent generations also embraced the new gladiatorial environment. On reflection, I wouldn't have had it any other way. But I have to acknowledge that we not only breached the spirit of cricket, but it was probably a selfish attitude. As a result of sledging, I don't think following generations inherited a game which was as special in the community's eyes as that which my generation inherited. Sadly, these days, captains don't earn or receive the same adulation that Richie Benaud and Sir Frank Worrell rightly received in their day. Players also no longer have the same relationship with each other that, say, Keith Miller and Dennis Compton had. Crikey, at times when I watched Ricky Ponting and Duncan Fletcher, who were sitting in the stand, and Andrew Simons and Hobbijan Singh on the field, I thought I was back in the 60s and 70s watching Billy Bremner and Nobby Stiles chopping down opponents. I suspect who runs cricket, and this is about the ICC, I suspect who runs cricket and how well it has been run have been contentious issues since the beginning of time. Irrespective of the existence of the ICC or its forerunners, for about the first 100 years, cricket was run by England and Australia. Both countries, proud advocates of democracy, ironically, even had a veto on the ICC or its equivalent. Unfortunately, on many occasions, self-interest was more important than the spirit of cricket, and countries such as India and New Zealand, to name two, were undoubtedly discriminated against. Before examining the specific issues, I must acknowledge and praise India for embracing the spirit of cricket through the financial opportunities it provides, which has enabled a number of test-playing countries to survive and some even to thrive. World cricket would be in a sorry state if it weren't for the money shared with other countries from India's television deals. You can imagine the indebtedness of those cricket boards which are able to negotiate a tour with the Board of Control for Cricket in India to their country. It generates a spike in the host country's revenue that will not be seen again until India chooses to come back the next time. World cricket would also struggle if India didn't have sophisticated administrators. More recently, India has found a way to involve its wealthiest entrepreneurs and Bollywood stars, and they've done that through the ownership of its IPL team. So they are a huge force. Today, many people level the problems of the game at the ICC. Technically, they are correct, but in practice, most members of the ICC have little control over many of the important issues of the game. Currently, there are 10 full members of the ICC, and the Constitution requires the approval of 70% or 7 members to advance any motion, which means that 40% or 4 members can block absolutely anything. Much of the game is controlled by the BCCI because it controls enough votes to block any proposal put forward at the ICC board meetings. The reason for this is some countries would not survive without the financial opportunities India provides. What is just as disturbing is through the Champions League, South Africa and Australia have a partnership with India and are unlikely to risk offending her. The current Champions League 10-year contract generates just under $1 billion and is 50% owned by India, with Australia and South Africa sharing the rest. As a result of the dependence on India, the process adopted by the ICC is simply not working. The ICC Cricket Committee, for example, is made up of a group of top-class current and former cricketers and umpires. They go to great lengths to make recommendations that they consider in the best interests of the game. These recommendations are then submitted to the Chief Executive's Committee. for approval, which normally happens as a formality. The recommendations are then raised at the ICC board meeting, and this is where it goes wrong. And if India doesn't like them, they are at best modified or thrown out. It's a sorry state of affairs and very frustrating for those who give so much time in their efforts to get things right. India's apparent indifference towards Test cricket, its response towards some of the key issues, the international calendar and the mix of different types of cricket, its attitude to the earlier ICC corruption inquiries, its indifference to the urgency to introduce anti-doping rules, the rumoured corruption hanging over the IPL, its attitude to the decision review system, and its role in the lack of due process in stopping former Australian Prime Minister John Howard being appointed Vice President of the ICC, are all examples, in my view anyhow, of disappointing decisions. But many of the problems of the ICC could be resolved if India invoked the spirit of cricket and didn't try to influence its allies on how to vote. The international calendar and the mix of cricket. In my view, every international team should be required to play at least 3 tests, 3 one-day internationals, and 3 2020 matches against all the other teams in a given home and away cycle. The Future Tours program is managed by the ICC, and it provides guidelines to its members. The ICC tries to impose minimums. However, the various big guns don't like the idea of being tied to these minimums, so they agreed to the minimums, but introduced an unless otherwise agreed clause, which in effect allows all 4 members to do exactly as they please. In a perfect world, no consideration should be given to any domestic tournaments. That is the IPL, the Big Bash, the Champions League, all of them, before the international calendar is set in stone. No domestic competition should take precedence over international matches. Unfortunately, India is preoccupied with money and 2020 cricket and sees its IPL and Champions League as more important than a proper international calendar. To compound the problem, India not only sold part of the game to private interests, but some of her administrators are seen to have a conflict of interest, which makes it a little bit more difficult for them to act in the spirit of cricket. 2020 has played a crucial role in creating interest in cricket to a new audience. The funds it generates at both international and domestic level also help underwrite all other cricket. The IPL has produced a wonderful opportunity for players from all cricketing countries to mix in a way that Martin Luther King would have never dreamed. But the IPL is too long in its current form. Many players are paid ridiculous sums of money, and young players are brought from other countries when they should be learning their craft in the domestic competitions, and the Indian board is more beholden to the private franchise owners than it is to the fellow ICC members. A net result of this is Test cricket is suffering. Some players appear not to have the same feeling for Test matches as their predecessors. There are more and more meaningless one-day international matches. Governing bodies have lost control of some of their players, and some players are abandoning their responsibilities to their home countries. We can huff and puff as much as we like and have all sorts of external reports done, but this situation can only be resolved by India accepting that the spirit of cricket is more important than generating billions of dollars. It's more important than turning out multimillionaire players, and it's more important than getting square with Australia and England for their bully boy tactics towards India over the years. It's ironic that the world, including India, rightly worship at the Nelson Mandela altar because of his conciliatory attitude, but then India eschews his approach by indulging in a little payback. Although the current Test ranking system is working well, I think a playoff for the Test crown is absolutely essential. Test cricket is still paramount in England, South Africa and Australia, but disappointingly it is no longer as important in India as it once was. Sadly, Pakistan can't play Tests at home, and the West Indies has big problems, which have diminished the standing of their Test cricket. The euphoria in India after it won the one-day International World Cup was absolutely amazing. The euphoria was not duplicated when India became #1 test team in the world. Cricket will only have its priorities right when Pakistan and the West Indies are given a helping hand and their tests become more meaningful, and when Indian players and people celebrate their success at test level as much as they did when it won the one-day International World Cup. That can probably only happen by having playoffs for test supremacy, say once every 4 years. The ICC's internal executive was bitterly disappointed that India was responsible for canning the scheduled 2013 Test Championship. Unless India embraces the spirit of cricket, I wouldn't hold my breath about the scheduled 2017 Championship taking place. DRS. I was involved in the embryonic stages with Channel 9 developing tools to aid the viewer in judging umpiring decisions, and have been a passionate supporter of the DRS system, well, I suppose all through the years. I do, however, accept that it's hard to argue against people such as Rodney Cavalier. He's the current chairman of the Sydney Cricket Ground Trust, who in opposing the DRS said this, and it's interesting, quote, "Cricket is fantasy. It is the intersection of heaven and earth. It cannot ever be a slave of certainty. The essence of cricket is honour and accepting the umpire's decision," unquote. Very interesting. Now, having acknowledged that, I still argue that it's just as important that we get the decisions right.